Hello, I'm Bright Lion. I am fascinated by politics, society, and the economy in the real world, and often I find myself wondering about the real-world effects that some in-game events might have while I play them. In this video series, I will speculate, wildly, about the potential effects that video game events and premises might have on the real world. As this is speculatory in nature, I acknowledge that there are many ways that these types of events can unfold, so take everything said here with a grain of salt, and of course I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments section. Plus, isn't it fun to engage in some crazy speculation about people who don't exist? In this video, we're going to be discussing the real-world implications of the Tarkov conflict. We're going to look at the major players as well as the actions they've taken leading up to it. From corporate espionage to government cover-ups, false flag soldiers and private military companies, to regular citizens and those unfortunate souls trapped inside the walls. This conflict affected many people, and the truth of how this all happened is muddied at best. I decided to ground my first video in an event that could be feasible in the real world, but would certainly draw a lot of global attention and cause ripples throughout the world. First, we must briefly touch on the contract wars, which were the events leading up to the Tarkov conflict. The contract wars were a series of conflicts between a multinational corporation, the government of Russia, and two competing private military companies acting as the soldiers. This followed news of a cover-up of illegal activity performed by some shady government officials who were interested in protecting a corporation known as Terragroup's activities in the region. This escalated into a full-scale armed conflict between UN peacekeepers, Russian MVD forces, and the two aforementioned private military companies. The thing that makes the Tarkov conflict unique to me is the concept of a multinational corporation engaging in an armed conflict with government forces. This corporation commands vast resources and manpower much akin to the power a small country would hold, but are not bound by the same rules as a governing body. The corporation we're talking about is, of course, the fictional Terragroup, which describes itself as a transnational holding company with subsidiaries who engage in a wide range of activities. These activities include biochemical engineering, chemical and medical testing, as well as weapons and arms testing. Officially, they categorize themselves as a scientific research company concerned with biotechnology applied in the agribusiness and farming industries, but it is believed by the Russian government to be party to numerous illicit activities within the Norvinsk region. Following the events of contract wars in which the USEC and Bear private military groups fought for control of strategic locations within the Norvinsk region that Terragroup had a stake in, the government of Russia decided to seal off the region from the outside world to stop the spread of the conflict as well as the influence that Terragroup held. This resulted in numerous individuals belonging to both factions to be trapped within the region, forced to fight over resources and control, while local ne'er-do-wells attempt to make a profit from this unique situation. The Tarkov conflict in and of itself being a byproduct of the contract wars and a risky move by a national government is an unlikely story in the real world, as typically the only reason a city, or especially a whole region, would be closed off would be if it were to be used as a classified military installation in which only certain individuals would be granted access. The region of Norvinsk and the city of Tarkov were already a civilian-populated area with infrastructure and buildings to support that, such as major highways, malls, high-rises, and numerous businesses. The uniqueness of the Terragroup influence on the region was likely a key factor in the decision made by the government to seal it off. The government at large wants to know what Terragroup was doing, and Terragroup was willing to protect this information at any cost. The USEC, or United Security Group, was hired by Terragroup to protect their installations from any outside threat. The USEC standard operating procedure is to control the flow of all information out of the region. The Bear, however, was an off-book faction of the Russian military sent to Norvinsk specifically to find out what Terragroup was up to. This presents a unique problem in that the government cannot officially investigate the corporation without being bogged down with corporate lawyers who will elongate the process until all evidence of wrongdoing is destroyed. However, by utilizing a black book squad of Russian military members, they can produce faster results while avoiding the blame if things go sideways, as they did. If this sort of event happened in the real world, what sort of effects can we speculate would ripple through the global ecosystem? The most important thing to consider is whether the world at large has knowledge of what is going on within the region and the extent of the conflict that took place before the city was sealed. I would imagine that the public would have little knowledge of the contract wars, as these sorts of conflicts occur globally, and the benefit of using a private military company is that it doesn't spark quite as sensational of a headline as catching two global superpowers duking it out over an abandoned factory in Russia would. However, the civilian displacement at the onset of the Tarkov conflict would surely garner the attention of spectators worldwide. The biggest factor, in my opinion, is that civilian aspect of this event. The population of the Norvinsk region was large enough to support multiple malls, a packed downtown area with large high-rises and hundreds of businesses, as well as a large industrial and multiple resort and vacation-focused destinations. This would indicate a sizable population of civilians who were forced to evacuate the region as the conflict grew. Many of these people would obviously be desperate to return home, and this phenomenon is not uncommon in the real world. Civilians are displaced by military conflict worldwide every year. This, however, is not a military conflict. So how would the government go about keeping other interested parties from finding out what it is they're searching for inside of Norvinsk? This is where the UN, specifically UNTAR, comes into play. UNTAR is a fictional branch of the UN responsible for peacekeeping and humanitarian relief within the region for any individuals who may be trapped inside. However, there has been indication that UNTAR might be partially or wholly controlled by Terragroup. In a document released on June 28, 2021, there was a QR code that, when scanned, presented the motto of Terragroup, Viris in Scientia, or Strength in Science, and this was on UNTAR letterhead. This would explain how the borders have stayed closed as the UNTAR soldiers, backed by Terragroup, would be keen on protecting any information about Terragroup from being leaked. For most global citizens, the Tarkov conflict may just be a political scandal that was uncovered and those guilty were tried. But for those who lived within the region's borders, they would have a different story to tell. Families being torn apart, people being removed from their homes, friends and loved ones being lost in the crossfire, as well as countless other stories. These stories, in the age of social media, would attract global attention, and people across the world would demand answers about how and why this happened. However, I believe that Terragroup would excel at disinformation and counterintelligence, as they had been able to avoid the attention of the government for as long as they did. And even after they were caught, the government still did not know the full extent of Terragroup's operations. Perhaps with more global pressure, the government would adapt and begin to share information, or perhaps they would only seal the flow of information even more to prevent this scandal from reflecting poorly on government investigators. On the topic of social media, there are no direct references to its existence in the Tarkov universe aside from some scavs using the words Instagram or TikTok in their names. There is also an event quest that makes references to important events in Tarkov's production outside the game, but I believe this is outside of the canon as well. I think that we could argue either way on this, and I invite you to think of the additional ramifications of social media's existence in the world of Tarkov. Due to the severity of Terragroup's actions to stop the flow of information, I think if social media did exist, it would be likely that cell towers and satellite signals in the region would be jammed. Both the Russian government and the higher-ups at Terragroup would want it this way. However, this does not account for those civilians who have evacuated. Let's look at a more top-level perspective, and talk about some possible global consequences maybe 10 or 15 years after the region was sealed off, considering, as players, we are already 8 years into this conflict. At this point, displaced citizens and family members of lost operatives would be demanding answers and not taking silence from their government. Global pressure would continue to rise dramatically to urge the Russian government to be more transparent in their investigation, and the corporation of Terragroup would be investigated by any country they did business in. If the Russian government acknowledged the true extent of Terragroup's illegal activities, this would only be furthered. As a result, the corporation would be closed and their research and assets seized if they weren't already destroyed, which would proliferate the spread of the information that Terragroup wanted so badly to keep classified. This tension, combined with the powerful resistance of Terragroup to investigation, could potentially spark a global conflict if NATO or EU troops were deployed to Russia. World leaders would be demanding solutions from the Russian government, and the Russian government, as any government, would be adverse to foreign military campaigns within its borders. People have speculated about NATO forces or the EU Defense Force entering the conflict, but this seems highly unlikely to me due to the tense political climate between Russia and both of these entities. If they did enter Russia, however, we can speculate about the potential effects of such an operation. First and foremost, it would be a logistical nightmare for foreign forces if the local government was not willing to assist and would require massive troop and supply movements throughout Eastern Europe. Secondly, it is safe to assume that if Terragroup-backed forces were willing to fire on Russian military and civilians, they would continue to conduct counterintelligence and sabotage operation against any forces entering the country, and I would not put anything past them. I wouldn't be surprised if Terragroup conducted further false flag operations specifically to increase tensions and spark a legitimate war between NATO, the EU, and Russia to distract from their activities. Of course, this is all speculation based on nothing but my own imagination, but I invite you to think about what you think would happen if the Tarkov crisis happened in our world and some of the repercussions and consequences of such an event. Feel free to comment down below with your theories, and if you enjoyed this speculative chat, please like and subscribe. I'm Bright Lion, and I'm heading back into the office for more research.